Ask Resource Center webinar. Today we are pleased to host Duane Miller, a registered parliamentarian with the National Association of Parliamentarians. He is employed as an interim minister in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. Duane coaches leaders on the management of meetings of all sizes and also assists with governing, document writing, and interpretation. He holds a certificate in non-profit board education from BoardSource and works with a variety of nonprofits to improve their governance structures. In today's webinar, Presiding at a Meeting, you will learn the basic principles of Robert's Rules of Order, how to preside over a meeting from beginning to end, and parliamentary procedure, lingo, and key phrases to use. Now we're going to turn it over to our presenter. Duane, thank you for joining us today.
You're welcome, Paula. Let me just say a little bit more about the specific agenda for this webinar. We're going to look at 6 things. First, we're going to start out with some basic principles of parliamentary procedure. Then we're going to walk through some basic steps for presiding at a meeting. Then we'll deal with the specific steps of handling a motion. We're going to spend a little time on classes of motions and the myriad motions that are out there. We're not going to get real specific about those, but just give a general overview of those, and then a few things that people don't realize about Robert's Rules of Order we're going to talk about at the end, and then we'll share a couple resources. So the rules don't exist just for the sake of being rules. The rules have a purpose. And the purpose is a regard for several constituencies. First of all, what's the will of the majority in any group? Also, what are the rights of the minority, especially when that minority is greater than 1/3 of the group? What are the rights of individual members in a society or an organization? What are the rights of the people who can't be at the meeting for one reason or another? The rules seek to protect all of those interests together. Organizations have all kinds of rules. They're governed by several sets of rules, starting with federal, state, and local law. And then if your organization has a charter, that governs what your organization can do on the local or regional level. And then the rules that you're probably most likely familiar with are constitution and or bylaws. The state law usually calls those bylaws, but depending on your organization, some organizations have something called a constitution and then some bylaws to go along with it. In parliamentary parlance, constitution and or bylaws are called bylaws for the sake of our conversation. And then after you have your bylaws, you have something called rules of order. We'll talk about those a little bit more specifically in a minute. Rules of order govern how meetings are carried out. And then standing rules usually have something to do with the administration of an organization. And then finally, believe it or not, oftentimes the way people proceed in meetings and in the organization doesn't have anything to do with anything that's written down. Custom oftentimes has something to do with how meetings are conducted and how business is transacted. But we won't talk about custom too much. We're going to talk a little bit about bylaws first. Bylaws govern how your organization works. And these include rules so important that they can't be changed, usually without previous notice or a 2/3 vote. So things like the name of your organization, the purpose of your organization, how one becomes a member and what a person must do to maintain membership, how meetings are scheduled and conducted, provision for a thing like an annual meeting. If you have an executive board, authorizing that executive board and what it's allowed to do, committees, what their functions are and what they're allowed to do. Those rules that are so important that you want some consistency from month to month and year to year. So that's what bylaws do. They govern how an organization works, and they do place limits on what an assembly can do and what other parts of an organization can do. And generally speaking, bylaws cannot be suspended. There's some exceptions to that, but in the main, you can't suspend a bylaw. Rules of order, which is what we're going to spend most of the time on our webinar with today. Rules of order govern how the meeting works. It governs how you transact business when members come together to make decisions for the organization. So we're going to spend a little time now on just some basic steps, some basic things that make for a valid meeting where business that's transacted is legal. First of all, you probably already know this, you got to have a quorum. What's a quorum? A quorum is the minimum number of members that you need to be present for business to be transacted. And the reason for the quorum is that you want to protect against unrepresentative action. You want to protect against 2 or 3 people deciding on a whim that they're going to show up and make a decision for 100 or 1,000 people. A quorum should be specified in your bylaws how many people have to be together to hold a valid meeting. It should be the largest number that can be expected to attend under normal circumstances. You want it to be a representative group of people when you can. And one thing we recommend in the parliamentary world is that the quorum should be a specific number of people, a raw number, and not a percentage. And the reason for that is that if you do it on percentage, then you're always having to calculate what the quorum is, because if you're like any other organization, your membership numbers change from time to time. You always have to recompute that. And so having a raw number is the best way to do it. Now, this is a question I get a lot. What happens if you don't have a quorum? Well, you can still start the meeting, but you're limited in terms of what you can do at that meeting. So what you should do if the time for the meeting has arrived, or you've given it a little time extra and your quorum isn't there, your minimum number of people isn't there, call the meeting to order. Maybe take some steps to obtain a quorum, working the phones, getting people there. If you can't get people there, one thing you can do is you can legally set the time for a continuation of the meeting. It can be the next week, the next month, whenever you want to have that. And what's important about that is that, say, for example, you're supposed to have an annual meeting in January of that year, and you try to have your annual meeting on January 31st, and you have a blizzard. And 2 people show up and you don't have a quorum. You can still adopt a motion to extend the meeting to meet sometime in February, and you have met your legal obligation to have that meeting in January. So so you can set a time for continuation of meeting, and the more important thing is here, if you've tried to meet in January, you fulfilled your legal obligation to have your meeting in that month or at that time. Now, if it's an emergency and something absolutely needs to be adopted at that meeting, say, for example, the roof's leaking and somebody's got a contract to get the roof repaired, oftentimes what you can do is you can still take emergency action, approve it, trust that it's going to be ratified by the group at a subsequent meeting. It's a risk, but more often than not, it's a good risk. If it's an emergency, you can take action and you can have it ratified at the later meeting. So those are all of your options if for some reason you don't get a quorum at your meeting. You need at least 2 officers to have a valid meeting. This is, again, assuming Robert's Rules of Order is your parliamentary authority. 2 officers are needed to hold a valid meeting. The presiding officer could be the president, call it the chair, whatever you call it. The presiding officer conducts the meeting, sees to it that the rules are observed. The secretary keeps a record of what was done. That record is usually called the minutes. The important thing about minutes is that minutes are a record of what was done, not necessarily what was said. The important thing is to capture the actions of the group. Some secretaries will put things in that record what was said as a way of giving some background behind the decision, but you don't have to legally do that. Sometimes people do that just to provide background. But record minutes are typically what was done in a meeting and not what was said. Now, the minimum number of officers for a meeting is different from how many officers do you have to have for your organization. If you're in Iowa, state law says that unless your bylaws provide otherwise, you need to have 3 officers for your organization, that being a president, a secretary, and a treasurer in Iowa. But that's different from what do you need for your meeting. For your meeting, you just need 2 officers, that presiding officer and that secretary. Usually, and we're going to talk about an exception at the end of the webinar, but usually you want to have some degree of formality in your meetings. The larger the meeting, the more this is true. And so members will address the chair, and there's different ways to address the chair, calling that person, that presider, Mr. President or Madam President, Mr. Chairman or Madam Chair, Mr. Chairperson or Madam Chairperson, to address somebody by their title and not by their name. And then members address each other through the chair. It's not proper usually to just turn to someone and start talking to them during a meeting. You go to the chair, you address the chair and say, you address the membership by speaking to and through the chair. Members do not speak until they are recognized by the chair, and when you're recognized by the chair, that gives you complete control of the floor and ability to speak. We want 1 member speaking at a time for the obvious reason that meetings aren't very productive when there's a lot of sidebar conversations going on. And then the chair refers to him or herself in the 3rd person. So the chair rules this, or the chair recognizes the member from Adair County or whatever it might be. So those are just some patterns of formality. And again, the larger your meeting, the more formal you're probably gonna want to be. And the more hot the meeting is. If there's a big fight going on, the more formal you're probably gonna want to be. So some basic steps for a meeting. When the appointed time for the meeting's arrived and it's been determined that a quorum is present, the presiding officer calls the meeting to order. And a couple of tips on how to call a meeting to order. First of all, try to avoid starting the meeting early unless you know everybody is there. I can tell you a couple stories about when a chair started a meeting early and some decisions were made before everybody got there, and of course the people who were there on time but late for the discussion were understandably not happy that the meeting had started early. Again, that gets to protecting the rights of the members. And then one way to start a meeting is just simply to say something like, the meeting will come to order, or I like to add, please. The meeting will please come to order. So just a couple of tips about how to get a meeting rolling. So order of business. Now, if your organization has adopted Robert's Rules of Order, you may not be aware of this, but if your organization has adopted Robert's Rules of Order, this is your order of business. There's already one in the book, unless you've decided to adopt another one. And this can be a good template for how you organize your meeting, whether or not you have your own rule of order or build your own agenda. One, you start out with the reading and approval of the minutes from the previous meeting or meetings. Then you have reports of your officers, your board, if you have one, in your standing committees. Then if you have any special committees, they can report. Special orders are things that got schedules for a specific meeting or a specific day or a specific time. Then unfinished business, anything that's carried over from a past meeting. and then any new business. So that's not a bad way of structuring your meeting, even if you don't want to, even if you don't have this as your set rule of order. It's not a bad guide. Now, what many organizations do is they adopt an agenda for each meeting, and they do this after the meeting's called to order. This is what one example, if you were wondering what special rules of order are for a meeting, this is one example. Your agenda is actually a rule of order. Most of the time, an agenda is put together by unanimous consent and is changed by unanimous consent. If there is no objection, we will take up the report of the committee on paving the parking lot or whatever it is you want to deal with. Strictly speaking, an agenda needs a 2/3 vote to change once it's agreed to, but again, if it's non-controversial, you can change it by unanimous consent. Again, if there's no objection, we'll take up whatever it is you want to take up next. So, handling a motion. This is really important for a chairperson to be aware of. There's two halves to this. The first half is bringing the motion, getting the proposal for action in front of the group. And then the second half of it is the actual consideration of the motion. So the first thing in bringing a motion is a member makes the motion. You simply, someone gets recognition and they move a certain action. And then a second member seconds the motion, and all that means is that another member wants to talk about it. The only purpose of having seconding is to protect the group's time. So someone makes a motion, another person seconds the motion. This is where friendly amendments are appropriate. So if there's a minor change that someone wants to suggest to a motion, they can ask if the member's okay with it. And if the member's okay with it, the person who seconds, if they're okay with it, then it can go forward. Now, if I suggest a change to a motion someone else has made and the seconder doesn't like it for some reason, then I can go ahead and second that motion. The whole point being that a couple people want to see the specific motion get in front of the group. But that's where friendly amendments have to happen, because once the chair states the question, that is, says it's been moved and seconded that X, Y, or Z is going to happen. Once the chair states the question, that motion becomes the property of the assembly, and friendly amendments are generally not in order at that point, and you need to use more formal ways to amend a motion. So a member makes the motion, another member seconds the motion, and then finally the chair states the question on the motion. It says it's been moved and seconded that, and then you can ask, chair can ask, are you ready to vote? And if no one wants to speak to the motion, then they're apparently ready to vote. But usually, people are going to want to talk about it. So 3 steps for considering a motion now. The motion's in front of the group, and members debate the motion or discuss the motion. And the way the chair recognizes a member is to say the chair recognizes, they can call that person by name if it's a small informal kind of group, or if it's a formal convention, the chair recognizes the member from Polk County or wherever you happen to be. And then as the debate progresses, the chair continually is checking in. Is there any further discussion or is there any further debate? We'll talk about rules for debate in just a minute. But after it's apparent that nobody else wants to talk about the motion anymore, the chair then puts the question or puts it to a vote. And the way a chair puts the question to a vote is to say, all those in favor say aye, or all in favor say yes. I prefer to say yes. Or all those opposed say no. And then once the vote's been taken, usually by a voice vote, and we won't get into other ways to take votes in this webinar. That's a little more, that's for another webinar. So anyway, the chair announces the result of the vote. There are X in favor and Y opposed, and then say after you've announced, and please announce the result of the vote. I know in some organizations they're shy for whatever reasons about announcing what the vote is, but the members really do have a right to know how many said yes and how many said no. If you have the custom of asking for abstentions or present, please know that in the normal case, abstentions are not counted in the calculation of the majority. It's the majority of people who cast an actual yes or no vote in the usual case. So there are X in favor, Y opposed, the motion is adopted, or the motion is lost, or you can also say the motion is defeated. Anyway, so debate, put the question, announce the results of the vote. So, couple of rules about how to assign the floor in debate. The member who made the motion it's called preference in being recognized. And the member who made the motion may speak first if she or he wants to. So if you're the chair and you've announced that the motion has been moved and seconded, are you ready for the question? You look to the person who made the motion to see if they want to speak first, and if they do, they have first crack at speaking if they want to, and they usually do. Now, a member may speak a second time after others have had the opportunity to speak the first time. And this is a little tricky, especially in big meetings, but as much as a chair can, a chair should try to alternate between those who are in favor of the motion and those who are opposed, to the extent that you can. Sometimes that's hard to know. Some conventions use red and green cards to identify who's in favor of a motion and who's against it, but this is as much as you can. Try to alternate between those in favor and those opposed, because again, the rules are trying to get to be fair, to hear both sides or all sides of any given question. Okay. Some other rules for debate. The chair does not participate in debate. The chair's job is to remain impartial, which is sometimes hard to do for chairs when they have an opinion about what's in front of the group, but that's the job of the presiding officer during consideration of business, to be impartial. There's an exception to that, which we'll talk about that at the end of the webinar again. Unless you have a different rule. Now, if Roberts is your rules, get ready for this. Speakers are limited to 2 speeches, which isn't a bad rule, and 10 minutes of speech. So you're going to want to at least have one special rule of order which defines how many minutes a person can speak for a speech. The places where I'm parliamentarian usually make that 2 or 3 minutes per speech. And then a member needs to stick to the merits of the motion. So if a member is starting to talk about the motion to pave the parking lot, and then they start talking about how beautiful the parking lot would be because it's so sunshiny and warm today, and they start talking about the weather, then the chair's job is to get somebody back to talking about the merits of the question, of the motion. And so the way to do that, if you're the chair, is just to simply say the member will please confine their remarks to the merits of the motion. And again, this is that third person stuff that we were talking about earlier. The chair refers to him or herself in the third person, and the chair refers to the members usually in the formal setting in the third person as well. All right. Vote requirements. Most of the time, majority vote is needed to adopt a motion, and majority means more than half. So easy enough to calculate. Now, some resources like to talk about how majority is 50% plus one, and that's a little tricky when you're talking about an odd number of votes. So it's just basically best to understand that majority means more than half when you're computing a majority. And then in some cases, a 2/3 vote is needed to adopt a motion. And some examples, this isn't all of them, but some examples of what you need a 2/3 vote for are whenever you want to close debate or adopt rules or modify existing rules or change your agenda. Those are things that require more than a majority, because in all of those cases, you are messing to some degree with the rights of members, and those require a supermajority, if you will, to make changes to those rules and arrangements. Just going to spend a little time. This is just going to be a broad stroke overview of classes of motions. I mean, we could spend all kinds of time on the ins and outs of motions, but I just want to spend some time helping you get a little familiar with all of the possible motions that are out there. A main motion is a motion that brings a substantive piece of business before a group, and you may only consider one main motion at a time. Now, where some people get confused sometimes is they leave the main out of that sentence and they go, oh, only one motion at a time. And then they think they got to adopt one motion before they can move on to something else. And that's not really the case. You may consider one main motion at a time, but there are a bunch of other motions that may or may not be in order that help transact business while a main motion is being considered. And that's what subsidiary motions do. They help the group manage the main motion. And then there's another class of motions called privileged motions, which help meet the needs of the group. And I'll show you some examples of this in a minute, that help meet the needs of the group while the main motion is being considered. Then there's a fourth class called incidental motions that help the group manage its business. There may or may not be a main motion on the floor while that's going on. And then there's a fifth class of motions. They're called motions to amend something previously adopted, or we call them bring back motions, is the better term for it. So overall, 5 different classes of motions. Some motions need a second, some don't. Some motions are debatable, some aren't. Some motions are amendable, some aren't. Some motions, we already talked about this, need a majority vote, some need a 2/3 vote. Some don't even need a vote. The chair decides whether the motion's in order or is admissible. Some motions are urgent enough to interrupt the speaker. Question of privilege, the building's on fire. It's really on fire. That's when you want to interrupt the speaker. Or question of privilege, someone looks like they're sick, can we call an ambulance? Some motions can be reconsidered and some can't. And so the one resource that I want to point to you now is the resource. It's a color chart. It's chart of ranking motions is the first piece, and then a chart of non-ranking motions. If you're a chairperson and you're kind of floored by the fact that some motions need second, some don't, debatable, some aren't, amendable, how do you do that? The best thing, short of committing all of this stuff to memory, is to have a helpful chart in front of you. I'm offering one to you. There's charts in Robert's Rules of Order. There's other helpful charts floating around out there. The key thing is don't worry about committing all of this to memory. There are tools out there that can help you look up details about motions so you know how to proceed. And I think the chart that's in the resources is one of the better charts that's out there. It was put together by a friend of mine, an attorney in Seattle, Washington. So anyway, so see that helpful handout, and we're going to actually refer to that as we move when we get to subsidiary and privileged motions. Okay, a little bit about main motions. Main motions bring business before the group, and they're in order only when there's nothing else before the group. So if the group is talking about whether or not it wants to adjourn, someone cannot say, I want to make a motion to pave the parking lot. It's only when there's no other motion before the group that a main motion is in order. The original and incidental main, this is a little bit of, it's important, but don't sweat on this too much to know whether it's an original or an incidental main motion. An original main motion is a totally fresh new piece of business. An incidental main motion is something that's been kicked around already, but you're solidifying it. So the motion to adopt, for example, usually grows out of a committee report. A committee comes out and reports, we recommend that the parking lot be paved. And then it's in order then to have a motion to adopt that recommendation that the parking lot be paved. Or go back to our example of the emergency when the quorum didn't show up and the roof is leaking and we needed to get $1,000 spent to get the roof fixed, then the group can have a motion to ratify, which was to say, yeah, we're okay with the fact that you fixed the roof. So those are examples of incidental main motions, or sometimes they deal with procedure, a motion to adjourn if there's no other business in front of the group, or a motion to take a recess if there's no other business before the group. Those are also incidental main motions. Again, just some specific information about those. In the end, not important, not too important, they're main motions. Now, what a subsidiary motion does is it helps the group manage the main motion. And what's listed in front of you are the subsidiary motions that are ranked from highest to lowest, and they're on that first of two handouts as well. And these have rank. And here's a little bit of the logic behind subsidiary motions. So you got a main motion to pave the parking lot. And let's say you're a member who just doesn't think that paving the parking lot is frankly all that important, and you'd like to see this thing go away. In other words, you want to kill it. And so the motion that member would make is, I move that we postpone this motion to pave the parking lot indefinitely. And that is Robert's version of kill. If you want to kill something, that's what you move. Lay on the table is a different motion that has a different purpose. We'll get to that in a minute. So motion comes before, I want to pave the parking lot. Somebody moves to postpone indefinitely, and somebody says, is thinking, no, I want to see that parking lot paved, but I want to make sure that we don't blow a lot of money on it. And so they make a motion to amend the main motion by inserting at a cost no more than $5,000. Here's the logic behind this. Robert makes kill a very low priority. If someone wants to talk about and perfect that motion, their motion has rank over killing the motion. That's the logic of Robert. So now we've got, believe it or not, 3 motions in front of us. Somebody else says or thinks, oh, this is way too complex for us to deal here. Let's dump this on a committee. Mr. Chairman or Madam Chairperson, I move that we refer the 3 motions in front of us to a committee to report at the next meeting. And so the committee then has to then deal with what's the best way to handle the paving of the parking lot, and they'll report back to the next meeting. So you see how this works, how that rank of motions works? It allows the group to kill it if they want to, but if someone wants to perfect it, you can. Or if someone, if the group decides that it wants to commit it to a committee, they can do that. That's kind of how this ranking works. Other subsidiary motions that you can apply to a main motion are to postpone to a certain time. Let's say you don't want to send it to a committee, but the group wants to think about it for a month. So someone can move, I move that we postpone consideration of this parking lot motion to our next regular meeting or whenever that might be. Other subsidiary motions can be to limit or extend the limits of debate on a main motion, to order the previous question or close debate on the main motion and whatever else is being considered. And the rules on this are getting a little complicated, which again is good for another webinar. And then finally, there's lay on the table, which oftentimes is used when you're in the middle of something, but your speaker has showed up and you want to listen to your speaker. And so I move that we take the motion to pave the parking lot and lay it on the table. And so that sets it aside so you can get to something else. So in a nutshell, that's subsidiary motions. The thing to remember about them, again, is that they have rank, and their purpose is to help the group manage the main motion. Privileged motions. Now, these rank above the subsidiary motions, as you'll see on the handout. And these are in order when there's a main motion on the floor. And I'm not going to say a whole lot about these except to say that these help the group manage its needs while it's considering a main motion. And again, these are ranked from highest to lowest. The surprising thing here is that adjourn has a very high rank. And the reason adjourn has a very high rank is that a group actually has the right to quit its meeting anytime it wants, even if it's in the middle of something. And so a motion to adjourn is ordered even when there's business on the floor, if the group decides that it just wants to quit for the day or the meeting. Then fix the time to which to adjourn is getting back to that example of the quorum that we had earlier where the quorum didn't show up. Fix the time to which to adjourn is to say, it's a motion to decide that we're going to extend our meeting to another day or another time. This one is oftentimes used when there probably isn't going to be another meeting quickly down the road, but people are feeling a need to get back together soon to deal with something. Okay, I'm not going to walk through every incidental motion here. Just know that there's any number of other motions that are out there that help the organization manage its business. And whether they're in order depends on a wide berth of circumstances. Again, way too much detail to get to in a basic webinar, but just be aware that there are all kinds of different motions that are out there. And again, the chart, especially the second page, is a real helpful resource if you need to know whether you can interrupt a speaker with any of these, or whether these need a second, or whether they're debatable or amendable, or what kind of vote you need on them. Again, this is why charts are really handy, because there's just a lot of possible motions out there. And then finally, the bring back motions are just motions that help a group revisit something that it's seen before. These are not ranked, nor were the incidental motions. Those aren't in the order of rank. These are in the order of how they're presented in Roberts on the slides. They're in alphabetical order on the resource, so a little different order on the resource than you see in Robert. But these are cases where the business is coming back to the assembly for one reason or another. And I won't go into these in any detail. So that's the overview of the motions, and I realize that can be overwhelming, but with a little study and with the use of the resources and remembering that the incidental and the privileged and subsidiary motions have rank, and the incidental motions may or may not apply depending on circumstances. the use of the charts can be really helpful to a chair. Now, some things that you're going to want to know. The most important thing that I think chairs need to know and groups need to realize is that we've talked during this webinar about the need for formality, but sometimes formality is frankly kind of impractical. And in some cases, formality isn't even required. A group can proceed informally if it's a board of no more than about a dozen members. So a small board can often proceed informally. Committees can proceed informally under the rules. And any small group can proceed informally as long as the issue that you're considering is not really a hot one. Well, what do I mean by informal consideration? In informal consideration, you don't have to have a motion, a formal motion in front of the group to bat something around. You can just simply, kick something around, decide what your course of action is going to be. Once you've decided what your course of action is going to be, you can formally, move something be done and approve the motion, have a vote on it. But you can have informal conversation about something leading up to a decision if you're in a small group or a small board or a small committee. So that's the first thing to know is that you don't always have to abide by the formal rules. Now, if you're in a small group and you've got a hot issue, I would recommend then you be a little more formal in how you go at it. And then we talked about this a little earlier, but you can use what's called unanimous consent or common consent when you have general agreement on things like an agenda, minutes, an amendment, or adjournment. And again, what the chair says, if there's no objection, we will adopt this agenda. Or if there's no objection, the minutes are approved. Or if there's no objection, we'll incorporate this recommended amendment into the motion. Or if there's no objection, we're going home. It just kills me at the end of a meeting where people feel like they have to have a formal motion to adjourn when it's clear that the order of business is done or it's 11:30 at night and we're all ready to go home. If there's no objection, all in favor, please rise. Let's get out of here. And then let me back up to the informal consideration. Something I forgot to say there on informal consideration is that the chair can participate a little bit more in conversation, in informal consideration. The chair can speak to things and maybe even make a motion and vote if you're doing informal consideration. Again, that's an exception to the usual idea of formality, but in small groups and non-controversial things, the chair can participate more too. Then finally, just remember, the purpose of the rules is to determine the will of the majority. That's why we have the rules. It's the bottom line. The rules don't exist for their own sake. They exist to determine the will of the group. A few resources besides the things that are available on the webinar website. Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised, is the current edition. That's important to know because there's a bunch of other books out there based on Robert, but they aren't Robert. The current color is brown. Now this is a thick book. It's kind of intimidating. It's something around 500 to 600 pages. And the 12th edition is coming out soon, and the color will probably change as well. There's a shorter book out there that is really, if you're new to parliamentary procedure, or even if you aren't, there's a shorter book called Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised, in brief. It's based on Robert. It's written by the same people who wrote and published Robert's, and it's a valid authority as well. And it's a great book if you're new to presiding. And it's a yellow book, and it's a thin book, and a very readable book. And I commend that to you if you're looking for an introduction to this material. And then finally, I'm willing to. One thing that the person who introduced me didn't mention is that I'm the stepfather and co-guardian of a young person with multiple disabilities, and so I have a stake in working with groups in the disability world. So feel free to call me at 515-867-1162 if you need advice on presiding or how to proceed with something or interpretation of bylaws. I'm happy to help in that way. So feel free to give me a call.